So I rarely edit videos, but I edited some of these videos in this and the upcoming episodes so that hopefully you can benefit a lot. Because even if you're an advanced lifter and you've done a lot of working out, I think that, yeah, you'll know these lifts, you'll know the movements, but you'll still gain some knowledge from this Strongman Tyler that I was working out with. And we're setting up these really deep, fundamental principles, but also he's inspiring because he's deadlifting over 500 pounds and the weights he can push around are incredible. But even if you're a total amateur to working out, I think you're going to learn a lot, number one, but more importantly, these movements are for you, and you really should watch the video versions of these episodes, this one and the next 5 episodes, on what I call the big 6 movements. And again, if you're an amateur, even if you're a woman, if you're a man, it doesn't matter about your age, I think you should understand these movements. A lot of times women think they're going to get bulky and huge, so that's why I'm singling you out, women, because there's a lot of benefits to be had here, no matter who you are. And these movements will translate to other parts of your life. It's not just in the gym. They'll actually translate to when you're lifting a couch, when you're moving furniture, when you're mowing the lawn, whatever. They translate to the rest of your life. So they're functional. You're basically developing a functional, powerful body that's injury resistant, and it's moving in a proper way. But I'm actually making this video to apologize because the quality is terrible, especially in this particular video and in 1 or 2 of the other videos. And that's because I'm a total amateur, and I actually set up one of the cameras with the wrong shutter speed. I just actually used the preset settings, but it was on the totally wrong shutter speed for the lighting we had. And so that resulted in these giant gray bars moving across the screen. Believe me, I know it's annoying. Don't thumbs down the video because of that. I already know it's annoying, but I still think the principles shine through. You're gonna understand the principles, and I actually hired somebody to professionally clean up those gray bars, and it's still poor quality. I get it. You know, I don't need feedback on that, but definitely, you know, add your constructive feedback in the comments in terms of what we're discussing and the principles. And I think the actual movements come through clear enough. And there's a lot of good clips, especially in the upcoming episodes, that are crystal clear, hopefully. And again, it's all about the movements. It's all about learning these patterns of functional movement. I hope it helps. All right, so today I'm videoing off-site because I want to actually go through what I call the big 6 movements. And this is the way I like to train people to work out, especially beginners. Now, obviously, there's genetic variation. Some people are actually more optimized genetically to train with endurance, athletic movements, but most people have a lot more benefit from powerlifting type movements. You can be 7 years old all the way up to 70 years old, and you can do these movements. You just want to start super light. It might be a broomstick, and then work your way up real slow. You don't need to be jamming on as much weight as you can do. That's the real secret to working out, is not to overdo it, not to overstress your body, especially when you're first starting. Work on the form and then add the weight slow. So the big 6 movements, what I call are the big 6 movements, are deadlift and squat. That's up and down with your legs, push, pull with your legs. Deadlift, pulling up, squatting, pushing down. The next 2 would be a press and a row. That's a bench press and just a normal row. So again, push, pull in this direction. And then finally, the final 2 would be an overhead press and a pull down. So push, pull, push, pull, push, pull with your legs, and that covers your whole body with compound movements. I mean, you can obviously get more advanced than that, but that should be the foundation for everybody's strength, rather than isolation, rather than using machines. So the problem with a lot of machines is they restrict your motion and they don't activate your stabilizer muscles. So we all have little stabilizer muscles in our shoulders, at all of our joints. And if you're using a machine that locks you into one real specific motion, you don't utilize those stabilizer muscles. So you get these big prime mover muscles that are highly developed, but then the little stabilizer muscles around your joints don't get developed, and they don't catch up to the big prime moving muscles, and that leads to injuries. So I like to use barbells. I like to use free weights, the big 6 motions. Again, deadlift squat, bench row, overhead press pull down. You know, you're not just isolating one muscle, you're working kinetic chains of muscles together. You're developing a real strength, a real injury resistant, strong overall body that's unbelievably healthy. So today we're going to go through the first of the big 6 movements, the deadlift, my favorite movement. Sounds the most intimidating, but it's really not that difficult. You're just picking something off the floor, putting it down. There's a few key issues that a lot of beginners have, but don't be afraid of the deadlift. Again, you can do it at a young age, you can do it at an old age, just start slow. But today I've got with me my buddy Tyler Kleinhuizen. He's a trained power lifter, strongman competitor. He runs Evo Ultra Performance gym here in Minnesota in the Twin Cities. Does an awesome program with electricity, electrical stimulation. We'll do an episode on that some other time soon. But for now, Tyler's going to demonstrate the deadlift, and I'm going to explain some of the principles while he's doing it. So the first thing that's one of the most important things is when you start, you want to keep your shoulders somewhat back. You don't want to let your shoulders fall into the bar. He's got about 500 pounds on here, which obviously he's trained up to doing. And you'll notice that his back is not rounding. Again, with the shoulders, bars coming up and down nice and straight. You could listen for his breathing technique because he's lifting a lot of weight. You'll notice that his back is not rounding. Again, with the shoulders, bars coming up and down nice and straight. You could listen for his breathing technique because he's lifting a lot of weight. He's keeping really tight abs. A lot of people wear a belt actually, but I prefer, especially when you first start, certainly don't wear a belt. You don't want that crutch. You know, you want to train your body to retain that pressure. It's called intra-abdominal pressure, and if you really want to look it up, it's called the Valsalvic maneuver, where you're actually charging up the inside of your body, tightening it up, tensing it up so that everything is tense and firm and stable. And when you start at the deadlift, when you start learning the deadlift, you can actually just take a bar and stand up at the top, even a broomstick. And the first motion that you have is to push your butt out. Push it out as far as you can, and then drop it, and then stand up. It's that easy. Again, a lot of beginners, you see they'll collapse their shoulders. Keep your shoulders back. It's a big one. Drop, stand up. It's that simple. It's not that complicated. And again, just add slow. Don't put a ton of weight on there. All right, Tyler, is there anything else you want to add on the deadlift?
Yeah, a couple things that most beginners need to just have a concept of is, one, what's the tilt of my pelvis and the tilt of my spine? And those two need to work together as a unit in order to preserve keeping pressure out of the lumbar spine. Because essentially, the deadlift, we're trying to use hamstrings and glutes in hip extension, whereas if we start, we don't actually get that extension if we round our back. We're mostly trying to extend from the low back. So that's where injuries kind of come in. So only go heavy enough and only go in as many reps as you can, maintaining a neutral pelvis in line with your spine.
And what's your take on your neck position? Because you can do two ways, right? When you deadlift, you can look up like this, or you can kind of let your neck stay neutral and,
Sure.
and kind of in plane. So your neck can either go like this, or you can be looking up.
I'm a much bigger advocate of keeping your neck neutral with your spine, because oftentimes people will try to look up too aggressively, and the arching of their neck will affect what their low back wants to do. So as long as they have that concept of the feel, oftentimes in the beginning I'll have people practice getting the feel of reps with their eyes closed. because then you're not relying on a focal point for your posture. You can feel it from your tailbone through your neck as one unit.
And also when you start deadlifting, both of your hands should face your body, and you shouldn't bend your elbows at all. You should have your elbows locked out. It's a position of strength there. Otherwise it puts too much tension on your biceps if you're flexing your elbows. But you probably naturally do that, but you may or may not naturally put your hands in a certain way, but ideally you have them both facing your body when you're picking up the bar. And of course, when you work up to real heavy weights, then you're doing a cross hand grip.
It's a grip challenge, yeah. So you can have straps and things to help mitigate that, but absolutely.
Yeah. So at what point do you start doing cross hand grip? And do you always do it this way, or do you always do it this way, or you switch?
You get into a groove, but I would say if you're talking about rate of perceived exertion, it might be in the 8+ category. You know, where anything less than that. 10. Yeah.
Perceived
yeah.
exertion.
So basically, you know, something like 405 maybe for the first set, you could try and do, if there's no grip aid, try and do it overhand. Whereas something above that, I know it's going to be a little dicey in trying to maintain that grip.
And do you recommend bringing a belt in at some point for just an amateur lifter, or
Sure.
what's your take on a belt?
My personal take kind of comes from my performance upbringing of your primary belt is your core musculature and everything doing its own job. So the belt is just there as essentially insurance. So I would only ever really do belts in a maximum effort type, competitive type, or if you're training into a competitive type situation, because you obviously want to practice with that belt. So I won't even touch a belt unless it's within a couple months of a competition where I need to practice the skill of moving with that support.
Great. One other foundational thing before we even get started deadlifting is the footwear, and whether people should do it with bare feet, or what kind of shoes should people wear.
Mm-hmm. So footwear for the deadlift, we want to be as low to the ground as possible and with minimal cushion as is possible, because essentially at any sort of load, that cushion is going to compress, and if your shoe is pushing you to the outside, pushing you to the toes, it's not going to be an ideal situation for getting consistent application of force. So these shoes, for instance, have zero support whatsoever. It's basically like a rubber slipper. Anthony's got some, minimalist shoes as well. So if your gym will allow it, wear socks or go barefoot, and then anything extremely flat and low to the ground.
That's great. All right, so some people tend to have their feet wider. Some people like to have their stance narrow. What's the ideal stance when you're starting to deadlift, or maybe always when you're deadlifting?
Sure. Easiest test for any beginner would be take a step and try to do a vertical jump. And right about that stance that you end up in should be your appropriate deadlift stance, because your body knows how to produce the most power in a linear direction. So if I have something like between shoulders and hip width, you should be pretty set up.
Cool, I love it. That's awesome.